welcome to Sacred Justice, a podcast that features discourse rooted in the pursuit of justice as sacred practice. Our weekly discussions reflect on current events, art, media, theology, and how they intersect with the movements for freedom and liberation. We hope that through these conversations, we can foster inclusivity by expanding our learning opportunities. We hope to cultivate digital community beyond the confines of our campus. And we hope to reconnect the church's social and spiritual callings. Join us for the journey. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sacred Justice Podcast. We are wrapping up our summer series where we talked all things, art, TV, what Ben was even doing on sabbatical, what was he watching? We talked about a lot of media and kind of how we are in this era of the pandemic, which is not over yet, how media has shaped these past 2 years for us, or helped us shape these past 2 years. How are we understanding what we're doing here in this world, on this planet? So anyway, this is the wrapping up of the summer series. I'm Mia McLean, and I'm here with
Ben Boswell.
Yes.
I could not have gotten through this pandemic without art. That's one of the things that I loved about Station 11, to kind of throw it back a little bit, was that it was a reminder. That whole show is like, this is what you're going to need to survive the apocalypse. And so I found myself going back to albums I love, singers I love, calling Mia while I'm in my car crying to Adele, and like singing the new Adele album, which everyone should be doing. Mm-hmm. And then like watching these TV shows that are helping me think through the world that we're in right now. And I just think we don't pay enough attention to art. And the church certainly hasn't over its history. And art is what we're all going to come to. In fact, and really the church ministry work, liturgy is an art in its own way. And we need to start thinking about it as art,
We try to make it a science.
Oh, yeah, it's not a science. Mm-hmm. It's not science. Yeah, I was thinking about this as we've talked about, what it's like to preach a sermon. A sermon is art. It's a written form of art. For a lot of people, they write their manuscript out. So there's writing, creative writing, academic writing. That's a part of it. A flow, you got to have beginning, middle, end. You got to, all these outlines of, where you're going to build to, where does the exegesis go? How do you capture people's attention at the beginning? How do you bring people to a close at the end? What are you trying to get across? When do you crescendo? When do you build? When do you get calm and quiet and slow? That's all then the performative part of it. It's also an art that's not only written, but performed. Mm-hmm. And then here's the kicker: written and performed every single week with a timetable. So it's a lot more like, what you would do when you were doing performances, where you have a date and a time and you got to show up and put it on, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what's going on in the world, it's coming and you got to put it. But a lot of times, you're doing the same show every day.
Yeah. Unless you're a comedian, unless you're doing improv. So the improv artists who do like improv theater at like Second City and United Citizens Brigade in New York, they are doing different stuff every week, but there's still a formula that they're fitting into, kind of like church, but it's a different show every time they get up on there.
Yeah. And then so you got it's a piece of art that's got to be performed every week at the same time. That's crazy. It's a crazy thing to think about. If you asked a sculptor, I need you to create a sculpture relating to this scripture and have it make it relevant to what's going on in the world, and you got a week. Right? It's crazy. But we do it, And that's why a lot of preaching is really bad.
Yeah.
Because people don't have the time to put into it, and they don't, curate it as an art. But anyway, I'm on a tangent now. But I think art and church, there's a lot of overlap here.
Yeah. And what they were doing in Station 11 was church.
That's right.
And art. Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. Anyway, y'all will listen to that again if you haven't listened to it.
Yes.
Or watch
the show.
Yeah. I gotta watch it one more time this summer. I gotta watch it. It just brings out something.
Yes.
So we're going to wrap this up this week with some other conversation about something we've been watching. Before we do that, what's going on in the world? What is not going on in the world?
It feels like everything is going on in the world. There's almost too much going on in the world right now. I don't think a lot of our people, myself included, can actually process how many different things are happening at the same time that are crises. I was kind of like putting it together in a paragraph for some folks last night, and I was like, well, we're in the midst of COVID still, right? And it's a plague, a global plague, as big as the Spanish flu, maybe bigger, right? We don't know yet. And we don't even know what the long-term impact of this is going to be yet. I was listening to a podcast that talked about like how pandemics have changed the world and changed how economies work, changed how society worked. Think about how people reacted to the bubonic plague and the Black Plague and what came after that. How they, when the population is reduced, one of the things interesting about that is that labor gets more power because there's less labor around. So labor has a whole different dynamic in relationship to capital when there's less people. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that could happen here. That's one thing. Then there's church decline. Then there's a war going on in Europe. Then there's like these January 6 hearings. There's housing crisis going on, inflation. I mean, it's one thing after another. We're getting ready to ramp up for hurricane season as if we didn't have anything else going on that we needed on our plate right now. Summer, it just feels like every summer there's something crazy is going on every summer around this time.
Yeah.
That we're trying to deal with.
And the violence, summer is when violence goes up. A lot of crime happens in summer. So I'm reading these reports out of certain cities. Baltimore, this guy who owned a restaurant shot dead, walked outside, shot dead. I mean, part of 6 people murdered in Baltimore over the weekend or something ridiculous. And it's just, I mean, you just don't, and they used to say this in church, but to get people saved, they would say, no one knows when it's going to be your last time, your last breath. We don't know. You could get killed in a car accident. So come to Christ right now. But that's really how it is. You can just walk out of your restaurant and you're gone, right? Yeah. Or a terrible car accident or anything, get shot up at the grocery store in Buffalo. I mean, there's just so much. Yeah, it's so much.
Yeah, Nina Simone says the daily struggle just to stay alive. That's where everybody is now. Even white folks now. White folks have become the victims of their own white supremacy. It's crazy. Like, I mean, Malcolm X would get up and say after every mass shooting, just like he did after Kennedy got shot, this is your chickens coming home to roost. Y'all did this to yourselves. Now you wonder why it's happening to you when you're at a country music concert or a movie theater or at school while your kids are getting shot at school. You created this world, of guns out of fear, out of power. It's just really sick and sad. And, you could die at any moment, so time to get saved. You need to come forward. You need to come forward. We don't have an altar call at Myers Park, but let's imagine that we do. Yeah. And you just need to come forward and give your life. A lot of folks need to give their life to Jesus. I gotta say that right now. Like 90% of the Christians in America need to give their life.
Even the ones who think they've given their lives, to re-give their lives.
They haven't given anything to Jesus yet. They're giving him a heart attack, giving him a hard time.
Yeah. I've been thinking in the context of COVID about the crumbling of society and really looking at it from the standpoint of the 2 nonprofits that I have served on the board of for a year that I'm about to resign from, not because I don't like them, but for other reasons. But I'm thankful that I'm resigning because it's really been a hard year of trying to understand alongside of what's happening at church, particularly in the way that our governance structure is at Myers Park. I've had a really hard time understanding how we're going to crawl out of this hole that we built for ourselves with all of these boards of directors that we expect every organization that is a 501c3 or a church to have. Who is staffing these things in this economy? And we've had this conversation offline, but boards of directors came into being heavily around the Gilded Age. And before then, they were mostly either wealthy tycoons, so men who just would sit around and figure out where money went, or there were their wives doing the Salvation Army or some other kind of board who didn't have 9 to 5s. They were not labor workers. They worked in home. I mean, they cared for children and things, but we don't live in that economy anymore.
Right.
So that free labor, every board that I'm on is a working board, meaning that we're not just at the top. We're also running programs because we have to double up to make programs happen. Yeah. And we just don't have the capacity. I mean, even, Reverend Tara is about to resign from a board. She's like, I can't, this is where am I going to find the time to do my job, to have joy and have peace with my loved ones, and to also serve on a board that doesn't pay me anything, but requires 10, 15 hours of my week, sometimes maybe more than that. And so I'm seeing the collapse as one of the organizations that I've been on the board for had to cancel some programming twice in the past month. One was poor registration and one was a COVID thing. And I could have told them to cancel this program a month ago, but I'm trying to be a good person, but they just couldn't see that the lack of registration has everything to do with COVID, and that people are just not interested in what you offered 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago. They have different needs now. You're wondering why certain faith communities are no longer contributing money. They can barely keep their lights on. I mean, we sit in a privileged space in Myers Park. These Myers Park churches can keep their lights on, but the average church has a yearly budget of $300,000 a year, if that.
Yeah.
And you want them to give and to participate. Their people are working 2 and 3 jobs.
Yeah, and they're in competition with all the nonprofits in town just to stay alive at this point.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who created the nonprofits and are sustaining the nonprofits, and then you asking them, they can't raise their own budget, let alone give away to nonprofits.
Yeah. So
it's challenging.
Watching the collapse.
We found that there's a study that they're working on right now as a part of the rebuilding community that a group of our leaders are doing, and they found that it takes our deacons close to 20 hours a month of labor, and some are closer to like 20 hours a week. Just to be a warm body in a seat, let alone to actually contribute and prepare for meetings. So we've been asking too much. And like you said, church boards and church groups were built from stay-at-home spouses and folks, and also people with capital and time on their hands, right? So now we're in a place where almost everybody is a laborer or retired. These are like the only 2 categories in churches, and they don't have time. A lot of people don't have time to offer, not to mention we're in the midst of a volunteer crisis. The people who would have the time to offer are exhausted, and they need their time with their families because that's the only time they have, because they're working Saturdays, they're working Sundays. I don't know what the future – I will say I know it's keeping my wife employed because she's a nonprofit consultant, and every nonprofit that she works with called her this year to say we need a new strategic plan. Because all of their strategies were completely eviscerated because of COVID. All of them had to start over again, no matter what their strategy was. They either had to revamp their strategy, create a new strategy. A lot of them are talking about board governance. A lot of them are talking about what are the expectations of the board? How do we work together? How do we function differently to face these challenges in the new era? Honestly, people who are not doing that are just waiting for the shoe to drop on their organization. And I don't even know, some folks are going to find out it's not sustainable for them, and the hardest thing to do is to say our time has run its course.
Yeah.
We've had a season, we've done some good work, and now we're moving into a different season. I was on a board that finally decided once and for all that they were done.
Yeah.
And it's painful, but it's part of the life cycle of these things.
I feel like the angel of death because I feel like I'm always that person these days that's like, why are we doing this? This is costing more than anybody is getting from it. I feel like I'm the person I feel my ultimate call eventually some years down the line will be to help churches close and close well.
Mm, yeah.
Like I could see
I have
myself.
some people who've done that. I know
Yeah,
some pastors that was their calling.
I'll be the closing pastor. The other pastor's gone. They retired. I will go to interim. I'll be like, I'm the interim who's going to help y'all close and take your money, your little money, and turn it into a foundation that gives away whatever money to
Or sell
grant.
the property and do something good with it in the community, right?
Yeah, and not just close because I don't think we need churches, but because we are so beholden by these buildings
Yeah.
and these governance models. And I think church is going to look different in the future.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think church is going to have that kind of nonprofit model, right? I think it's going to be different. I think it really is but it's like roaches who are about to die. The kicking and screaming that's going to happen. It's going to be terrible to get people to really see that. So I'm like the angel of death who's like, okay, it's time for us to wrap this up.
You're not the angel of death, you're the grim reaper.
Oh, okay.
Because the grim reaper comes and tells you that death is coming.
Okay.
Right? And then the angel of death is the one that comes on the day you're dead. So you could be both. But the grim reaper comes earlier and is like, hey, you see the grim reaper and you're like, oh man, now's the time.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna die. I don't know when it's coming, but the grim reaper's kind of out there looking for me.
Yeah.
I think you should change your Twitter handle to Reverend Grim Reaper.
Maybe. Yes. I won't consider this.
It's better than confront whites.
Oh. I mean, that it captures their attention. You said sexy headlines. It captures the attention.
Headlines. Mm-hmm. Speaking of a sexy headline, on this collapse, sometimes I feel like things are collapsing, and then I'm like, are they really collapsing? Because if they would collapse, we'd have people in the streets, and things would change. But it's almost like things are only collapsing enough to enough people that it doesn't create mass movement for change. Like Carol just got back from Seattle, and she was telling me everywhere you look in Seattle, there's a homeless camp. Did she tell you this?
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, it's in the suburbs. Like imagine Myers Park, and in the middle of Myers Park is a homeless camp. That's what Seattle's.
That's the whole West Coast, Bay Area, Portland. When I was in Portland, everywhere up that coast.
Folks can't survive because the rent's too high, the housing prices are too high, and what are you going to do? How are you going to survive? How are you going to live out there? And so these homeless camps, it's kind of like that movie Nomad. We've talked about that before. Mm-hmm. People are migrating just for labor to these different labor sites. And I'm worried about the housing crisis right now. Not the same as the 2008 housing crisis, but right now you can't buy a home.
No.
People cannot buy a home. Interest rates are creeping up. Inflation's creeping up. Somebody told me, one of our real estate agents says there's thousands of homes in Myers Park, and right now there's only 4 on the market.
Wow.
4.
Wow.
There's no supply. And the average, it usually takes about, the inventory is about like a month the inventory is like less than a month right now. Houses are not staying on the market more than like 2 or 3 days.
Right.
And so people are paying $100,000 cash above offer to get these houses. And a lot of this is because the reason there's such a little supply is because everybody moved during COVID. Everybody started buying houses. Everybody started buying what they could. Interest rates were lower than they ever was. Everybody was disappointed in their apartment complex, which was raising their rent to exploit people during COVID. Mm-hmm. So people are like, well, if I can make more, I can get a house for $800 a month mortgage at 4% interest instead of paying, $2,000 a month for this 1-bedroom apartment. So I'm going to go out and buy a house. So they bought up all the supply. So now there's no supply. And then interest rates are going up. So the people who have to move and who need to buy and need to sell are in all kinds of strange predicaments. I mean, people are like sending letters to the homeowners to try to convince them, in addition to paying $100,000 over asking. I heard some crazy story about one thing one buyer did to try to convince the homeowners that they were the right people. It's just crazy stuff, ridiculous stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, they promised to name their firstborn child after the homeowner.
It ain't that serious. I mean, I guess it is, but it's not.
This is on the Daily. I heard that on the New York Times Daily.
That's not. Mm-mm, mm-mm.
I mean, that's how crazy it is out there right now, and I just don't know what that means for the rest of the summer and the fall, especially as inflation continues to creep up. And now we got a bear market, in addition to that, so the market's not doing well. Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
It is, and I mean, I think people are going to have to go back to having roommates. I see that in some people's future. I'm fighting that in every fiber of my being.
You want to go back to that? Yeah.
No, but I think that we also are in a culture, as culture has shifted, where everybody has their own residence now. So it used to be there were times in your life where you would have 3 generations in one home, and that was normal. So your mom would live with you, you would be there with your spouse, and then you had some children, right? And so you wouldn't have your mom has her own house and then you have your own house.
Right.
And I think we're going to go back to that kind of like multi-generational type living at least.
Yeah.
Because I just don't, I don't see a future where we're going to all be able to have our individual, I don't think we're going to survive.
And I think the thing that starts to get me hyper upset is when I start thinking about folks that can't, even if they wanted to, can't become the kind of producers in this market that would give them the sustainability to live on their own or even with somebody else. People who are living on Social Security, people who are living on disability. This is their whole livelihood because they can't do the kind of jobs the rest of us can do. Mm-hmm. And so what happens to them in the midst of a housing crisis and a market crisis? Mm-hmm. It's one thing for, me to have to spend more money on a gallon of milk, right? Or gas at the gas pump. And there's a lot of complaining about that right now. A lot of that is first world privilege. I mean,
it is, but still, I'm still pissed about it because it's double what it was last year. It's double
bad.
What it was last year. Okay.
But if you're a person who you were barely making it before, now you have to make a choice. Is it really worthwhile for me to work?
Yeah.
Because I got to pay double the amount of money that I was paying before just to get there. So should I even do my job? So I mean, these kind of crazy calculations. I was thinking about, that with the shortage on formula. What about parents who have adopted a kid? You can't breastfeed an adopted kid. Right. So like, what do you do if there's a shortage formula and you can't get access to it? We're in an amazing moment where there are just so many things that are in short supply that you can't get. And people are starving, people are hurting.
Yeah. And going back to what you were saying about nonprofits having to change their mission and their strategy, what does that mean for the church? Right. So some churches are trying to still have the same strategy they had for 25 years, 30 years. And even in terms of the nonprofit that I work for, one of them at least, they're trying to have one strategy that's purely like bringing people together when the needs are like people are hungry, right? And so church can't be bringing people together purely anymore. And we're going to put some ashes on your head and let you sit there and reflect when there's people not able to pay their rent. We're going to have to change our strategy and our mission or die.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a different level of urgency around some things than we've had before. The church has got to think through that. What does it mean to be church in a time where everybody's hurting?
Do we need Oregon or do we need, I'm not just talking about Myers Park. I just mean in general, do we need Oregon or do we need to have a soup kitchen? Because that's how bad it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And what a lot of churches aren't even into direct service. They're giving money instead, so they don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Well,
a lot of problems. We can't solve them all, but
we can't.
Keep talking.
So one of the things that I actually told Ben to watch, that then he told me that he told me to watch it, even though I had already told him to watch it.
Wow.
I'm going to find that text message or something. I know I sent you a text message that said,
you're going to find out it was some other Ben, some other friend named Ben that you sent that to.
This special on HBO Max called Rothaniel or Rothaniel. Not Nathaniel, Rothaniel, like Roth.
Yeah. Rothaniel.
Rothaniel. I had heard people talking about it online, and I was like, I'll get around to it. And then one day I really was in the mood to watch whatever it was, because I knew it was touchy based on what I was seeing on Twitter. But I said, oh, let me watch this. I'm in the mood for some like touchy feely, whatever it's going to be. I don't think I really watched the Carmichael show when it came out, which is starring Jerrod Carmichael, who is the comic whose birth name is Rothaniel. And so he's the one doing this stand-up act that's filmed and on HBO Max, if you have it. But I had heard of his name. I just never really was invested in whatever he was doing, probably because I was busy with school or something. There are seasons of your life when you miss whole series because you're like in seminary or you're in grad school. And so I think it was one of those times when I just wasn't invested in television. But this series, this special is out, and I didn't really know what to expect, Ben. And I don't know if you knew what to expect either. Had you heard about things before you watched it?
I mean, I kind of thought, like, I had a sense that there was some LGBTQ stuff going on in Rothaniel, but I didn't know. That's all I kind of knew going in. And I knew that it was like a kind of a different kind of stand-up, that it was more like something more heartfelt or something more preachy, And so I really didn't know what to expect going in. And I was totally blown away, totally surprised. I didn't have any idea what we were we're in for. But I was surprised. I was shocked. I was moved, emotionally, spiritually, and also just thought, God, how did he do this? How did he emotionally prepare to get up in front of a crowd of people expecting stand-up and do kind of like really what I would consider to be dragging all your skeletons of your family out of the closet and showing them off to everybody and talking about them in front of everybody? That was, woo. I mean, to start with his grandparents, right? Start with the two grandfathers, because that's where the name came from, the combination of those two names. So he starts there. Oh.
It was relatable content, I have to tell you. And pause this if you haven't watched it and go watch it, because we're going to spoil things. But talking about, the kind of culture of, I don't even know what to call it. There was a lot of relatable content. So like when he's talking about, I guess one of his grandfathers had a bunch of children or whatever. And I was thinking about my grandfather who had a bunch of children. He was married twice, but he had some outside children in between, and not in between, but like he had two children the same age, but it's just like thinking about how like this man was, a deacon in the church and praised for being so great. And, but like, we know better, but like nobody really talks about it except for behind the scenes, quiet, like, those little sneaky conversations.
Secrets. He called it secrets.
Secrets. Yes.
He said, I got secrets. I've got so many secrets.
Yes. And it was such relatable content. I was like, and so to connect it to his whole arc and getting to this place where like he's, coming out and he's experiencing some of this backlash from his kind of religious family. He's like, wait a minute, but grandfather was able to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. The thing that really blew me away as a man was watching it and thinking through how that never happens. Even when there's truth telling, it's almost always about women and not men. So like the fact that he called out not only himself and his own story as a man, but told the story of his grandfathers and his own father stepping outside of their marriage, and doing different things. And then how he confronted his dad and how he told his mom. And, it's almost back to that accountability thing we talked about, last episode. Like there's almost no accountability for men because for whatever reason, people keep their secrets.
Yeah.
And there's a culture of secrecy around their behavior, their attitudes. I had this great phrase given to me by my mentor, Maida Commerce, who she relates to this in a lot of ways. So I want to talk about her relationship to Rothaniel. But she said that there was this phrase. I think I may have told you this. I don't think I put it on the podcast, that they would say they had this term that they were an angel in the streets and a devil at home.
You said this last time we were talking about maybe domestic violence or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing. Like we out in the streets, they're a deacon, they're giving people money, they're taking care of people, they have a job, or they're employing other people, and everybody thinks of them as really good human beings in the community. And at home, they're beating their wives, and everybody keeps that secret because it's embarrassing to the wife too, right? So she doesn't want to tell everybody. So that kind of secrecy then creates this system of violence, because then children get caught up in the violence, and then they keep secrets about about the violence that they've experienced, and then they commit more violence to other people, and then they keep that secret. It's a toxic cycle, you know. And so like Rothaniel, like the HBO special, Maida has written this book called Womaning, and it's basically a memoir. But it is a no holds barred, total, every skeleton out of every closet, everything that ever happened to her from the time she was a very young child all the way through her whole life, and what happened to her mother and her grandmother, all the way from grandma all the way to her and her children toward the end of the book. And you just, like it's one of those things it's so heavy you got to put it down for a little bit and then pick it back up and keep reading. Because the content is so heavy. That's how Rothaniel felt too. And she told me that the whole memoir is also a philosophy of life, a statement of life, because her work is called story medicine. And so she says, if you can't own your story and tell your story, and by telling it, she means every little bit of it, all the parts of it, you can't actually find healing.
Yeah.
So and the truth, telling the truth is part of the healing. Naming it, claiming it, owning it, getting it out there is part of and her great phrase is, in our stories are our deepest wounds and our most powerful medicine. So we got to go into our stories to find both of them. So she does this work of trying to get people to tell these stories and write these stories down that are so deeply painful. They don't want to tell them. They don't want to talk about them. They don't want to look at them. And it's very therapeutic, to go through that exercise. Hard. And I felt like that's what Rothaniel was doing, And one of the things I said, as I was watching Rothaniel, I kept thinking, what is his family going to think when they watch this? And what's going to happen to him? And she said, at some point you realize you got to let the chips fall where they may.
That's right. I completely agree. And I had that thought when he was talking too, and I thought about how I used to be a heavy blogger. So I used to write these essays and things, and my mother would hate them. I just, why do you have to talk about this and that? And why do you talk about that in the essay? But I mean, it's really hard to have to share truth with people, and you can't be honest. And a lot of that came from, I remember, this was actually started writing before I did CPE, but when you're doing CPE, clinical pastoral education, usually they make you do this like genealogy thing. This genealogy day. And I was in this program. It was me and my friend Carolyn, who was like a white woman from Minnesota. And then there was like 2 Orthodox Jews and like one man from West Africa. And we're all doing our family tree, and it gets to my part, and it is so complex. And so when Rothaniel was telling all these different stories of his family, I think about, and even when I was reading one of your other mentors' books, previewing his book, and he had this section in there about genealogy day or something in his classes, I was thinking about how complicated genealogy, the story of telling our story of our family is. The Orthodox Jews had very neat family trees, and very like, okay, my grandfather was my grandmother, and then they were only married once, nobody was divorced, and then they had children, and nobody had extra children. I get to my family tree, and there's like all these little side boxes and triangles, and I have 4 brothers, and it's 3 different mothers, and blah, 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 and they were like, they couldn't even understand the complexity, because culturally, even if there is a legacy of some of that in certain cultures, it's really not as prominent as it is in others, or at least they're not telling the stories.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so and I think, and there's probably more complexity there in the Orthodox that's just not around different tangents and branches, but really just how people hold their relationships together, even when they shouldn't. That creates a whole other level of complexity.
Exactly.
So, where there's like your love and your resentment for someone are all baked together, and you don't really know the difference.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can't separate them from each other. So are you resentful or are you filled with love? You don't know, because you couldn't tell those two emotions apart if you tried, because you're just you feel all that for that one person. It's amazing to think through our family trees like that and to think through the complexities of them. But I don't know many people who really are willing. I think maybe this is a Southern thing too. Like, people don't tell the truth about their families down here. Nobody tells it. Nobody talks about their family truth. Anything we can hide in the closet, we will hide in the closet, as in the South. That's like the Southern tradition. And people are very adept at it,
Yeah.
We will get those skeletons in there. We don't need to see them right now. We don't want to look at them. We don't want to talk about them. Don't even talk about Bruno. He's in that closet. Forget about him.
My problem is with this, and as Rothaniel explores in the special, is these are some of the same people that will turn around and try to condemn you for something, whether that's like being gay, which is not a sin.
Right.
For us, we don't believe that, right? Or it's something else, like you had a kid, but you weren't married, or whatever the thing is, right? These same people that have, in my family, that have illegitimate children, people who are pastors in my family who have other children outside of their marriages, turn right back around on Sunday morning and are like, you're going to hell because of X, Y, and Z. That's where I draw the line, okay? Because I'm not going to police your secrets. But when you turn around and you start putting your foot in your mouth, that's where I'm like, okay, we're done here.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those places where pastors have to be very careful. I'll tell two stories on that I think are good. One is that when I went through a divorce and in a previous church, and I asked, and we put the news out, like we sent a letter out to the congregation, which is just like, name a profession where you have to write a letter to your entire community and employer that you're going through a divorce. Like, only ministers have to do that. The shame that is around that is just ridiculous, how much they put around that. Anyway, so all that to be said, so you got to do that because that's part of the job. And so Lauren was going to preach for me the next Sunday, and the text was from the lectionary, and it was on divorce. And so we come into the staff room and we're kind of debating, what should she preach on? And I was like, preach on that. Preach on divorce. She was like, really? I was like, yes. Yes. Preach on it. There's a reason it's in the lectionary this week. Deal with it. Open it up. Talk about it. You got divorce in your family. Everybody in the church probably has some divorce in their family. Talk about it. Be open about it. Don't try to hide away from it just because of me. But it was not easy to sit there as someone going through it and listen to her preach on that. But you do, because you want to. That's part of what it means to have integrity. Sometimes you got to do the hard thing. Yeah. As opposed to this other story I've got, where I was at my first appointment ever was as a youth minister at a Southern Baptist church. If you can believe that or not, Ben Boswell served as the youth pastor.
You've come a long way.
At a Southern Baptist church in Raleigh. And my supervisor taught me a lot about ministry, but he and I disagreed on everything theologically. And he kept going on. He was just so anti-abortion, just anti-abortion, couldn't come around on that. And but he and his wife were going through some difficulties, some infertility difficulties. And so without telling anybody in the church what they were doing, they did IVF. And so he gets up on a Sunday, it's Mother's Day. And in that church, they had this tradition, and everybody who hears this, I've told this story before in a sermon, but every time you hear it, it's awful. They had a tradition where they gave every mother in the church got a rose on Mother's Day. And they honored the oldest mother, the youngest mother, and the mother with the most children.
Okay.
And they all came up and they all got a special prize that day. The newest mom the oldest mom and the mom with
when you say newest, you mean youngest or newest?
I think youngest.
Okay, because that could be controversial too. If the youngest is like 14, which I grew up in a church where we had a lot of teenage pregnancies, so that would have been
newest. This is a white church, so they wouldn't want to do youngest. But they did newest. Anyway, it was a fertility festival. It was not. There was no church in there. And so on this particular Mother's Day, he turned around and gave his wife and the choir a rose. And so then he gets up in his sermon. This is his sermon for the Sunday. And he says, he's preaching on Abraham and Sarah. And he says, well, you might have noticed that I gave my wife a rose. And I just want you all to know that after years of trying, miraculously, God has given us a child. We are pregnant. And he goes through this whole sermon on Abraham and Sarah and about how it was a divine blessing to them and a divine blessing to him and his wife. And never mentions IVF, never mentions the complexity of morality related to IVF and its proximity to abortion, right, as a medical practice and as a reproductive health practice, and goes through the whole sermon. And I just that was a moment for me where I lost all integrity and credibility in my eyes. I just thought, you're just lying to these people. It's not a miracle. It wasn't a miracle. You went down to the science office.
Yeah.
And got you a kid. And now you want to present it as a miracle, even when you don't even believe in it, and you've been preaching about it for months and months and months. But he couldn't see the connection between infertility and abortion.
That's
what I found.
So it was bad. Anyway, I just think that's one of those where pastors got to be really careful. If you're going to get up and preach against something, you got to have some integrity around it in your own personal life.
I mean, integrity in general in your own personal life. I mean, I think things happen, and you can handle whatever missteps, however you have misstepped in your life, right?
Yeah.
But to turn around and to say some of the most egregious things that particular member of my family says on a regular basis, though I think he's gotten better since he was outed on social media for having this other child, but it took that for him to even say something. And that child, by the time he was outed, that child was like 8. It was something ridiculous, Huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just saying that's crazy. Why did it take that long?
Right. So it took being exposed and embarrassed. And so when I was watching Rothaniel, I was just thinking of all the ways, as you said, men get away with certain stuff, get away with certain secrets that particularly cisgender women could never get away with. And it was interesting. I don't know how I felt at the end. I think I felt like I was glad I watched it. I felt that it was really powerful. There were some people who didn't like his language in there. He uses what is considered a slur. And so there's also this conversation about who gets to use the F word. Can you use the F word if you are identifying as somebody in the community? So there's all these different, there's all these think pieces on the internet about, why people didn't like it but I appreciated it.
I thought it was very powerful. To me, the thing that was so amazing is at the end when he's letting the audience speak to him and he's not just shying away, he's actually answering their questions or responding to them. And never does he just simply agree.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. Or take their answer. Cause a lot of their answers are cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's throwing out simple solutions, easy answers to his crisis. And he's trying really hard to hold space for the complex emotions and the problems that don't get easily solved. As he says, she doesn't accept me, but she's my mom. How do you break relationship with a person and it turns out it's your mother? That's a different conversation, right? And I really appreciated how he held that tension and wouldn't go toward the easy answers. And he did that for a while before he kind of comes to the conclusion and turns the show around. And again, that impressed me because I thought, how do you prepare yourself emotionally to do that? To be ready to hear from the audience, respond to them honestly. You can only really do it once. That's why it has to be an HBO special. You can't keep doing that every night. You can't go around the country doing that every night. It'd be exhausting.
That's hard. And I What I appreciated was the silence. There were some points when he was just completely silent. I was like, oh my God, is he going to cry? Is he like, what's happening here? It was just, you were at the edge of your seat, like, what's happening?
That's why I felt spiritual.
Yeah.
To me, like it felt like you were on holy ground, and that's what people have been saying about Maida's memoir. It's like reading it has felt like you're walking on holy ground with her. Yeah. And that's what I felt like with him. Like if you really are dealing with the complexity of your father and grandfathers and their infidelity and what it did to your family and what it did to your mother, and then now what your mother's doing to you, you're going to have some pauses to reflect. And he paused for a long time to answer those questions. And in that space that he created all this time to think for me, like, God, what would I do? Or how would I respond to that question? The silence itself was just a holy, kind of these holy inbreakings in the midst of the whole thing, that's why, even if I didn't like the content, I still would have thought the performance was pretty powerful.
Oh yeah. Oh, I thought it was brilliant. The writing of it. Yeah. Go watch it if you haven't.
People need to watch it.
Go watch it. And it also just speaks to the complexity of the human condition. And I say this all the time, even with that person that I was just referring to in my family, or the couple of people in my family who are just, theologically and ideologically, we are not aligned and probably will never be. There are times when I still break bread with those people.
Yeah.
And I know that they are different people to different people. And that's also one of the things that you learn in like relationships with people, in all kinds of relationship. People are different people to different people. So you might have one experience of your, grandfather, and somebody else has a completely different experience. So how are you convincing them that your experience is the most
people to different people?
Yeah.
God, that's just such a brilliant phrasing of that.
Yeah.
I think about how that impacts church.
Yeah.
Because people are different people to each other as congregants than they are to their ministers. People are different people to their ministers, right? So the way someone treats you or me, it could be very different than the way they treat their family or the way they treat their friends and fellow church members. And it could be, it's kind of like what I was talking about last week with the street angel and the church demon. How you relate to different people depends on the context and the person you're relating to. Mm-hmm. So this is why it's so hard for people to hold each other accountable, because they are relating to a person in one way, and they can't imagine relating to them in the way that you're telling them that they've acted.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like when somebody comes to a mother to tell them that their husband is abusing their daughter or son, and the mother can't accept it, not because she doesn't believe the children, even though she should. She can't accept it because she can't believe that the person that she relates to would relate to others in the way that they're relating to them. Yeah. And that's just such a hard thing to do, because we imagine that our relationship with another person is the way they are everywhere.
And that's not it.
No.
There is some essence of their being, unless they're a sociopath, there is some essence of their being that is the same. But I have a mentor who I know quite a few people have had run-ins with, and, they've had issues in both ways, not just one way. It's not always one way, Yeah. But I, in order to maintain this person, keep this person as my mentor, who has always been super respectful and helpful to me, I just have to accept that he's a different person to different people. And that's just...
Yeah.
And I take what I can get from it, and I give what I can give. And then I don't try to convince other people that he is going to be the same to them as he is to me.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't have to talk about me like that out here on this podcast.
Oh, geez.
Oh my God. No, I mean, people are different, right? Yeah. People have different relationships. It's like when you have those two friends who really like you and you like them, but they don't like each other.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't understand this. Why aren't you guys best buddies? And It's not the way it works all the time.
No.
You got to have and create boundaries to separate your relationships out and understand they're different when they're with different people.
Yeah.
That's called self-differentiation. And people have a very hard time doing it. They can't differentiate their relationship with one person from how that person shows up at church, at home, at work, who they are to their spouse, who they are to their kids. And we have to be able to do that work or we're really not healthy.
Now, and like I have a friend group that always has somebody falling out with each other. And like I tell people, if somebody has violated you in a way that is just egregious, it's completely violent, they have harmed you, that's different than we had a falling out over something, ice cream flavors and we don't speak anymore, right? Like there's a difference, right? So if your husband is abusing you, I'm not going to also probably go have drinks and act like that didn't happen. That's violence, right? Wow. But if you're just, going separate ways in your life, that's a different thing,
Yeah. No, that's different. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well. But yeah, Moy, how did you put that? People are different people to different people.
People to different people.
That's a sermon right there. Mia McLean.
I've been thinking about that for years. I've been mulling that over.
That's a good one. Yeah, folks need to watch Rothaniel. Yes. I think it's powerful.
Yeah.
Really good. One of my favorite points of that one I want to point out was when his best friend tells him that his father was over at his auntie's house. That he tells the story. I'm spoiling stuff now, so turn this off for sure if you haven't watched it. But he tells him that his best friend's like, "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, how are you doing?" He's like, "Who are you talking about?" He literally pretends he's not that person. Like he's like, "Who are you talking?" He just pretends that he's not that person, even though he knows he's talking to his son's best friend. It was the wildest thing. Then he asks his aunt, and his aunt does the same thing. She's like, "Mr. Carmichael, who? I don't know."
Oh, gosh. Oh, what tangled webs we weave in life. Yes.
Denial's not just a river in Egypt.
Well, on that note,
I got dad jokes for days.
On that note, thank you all for listening to our summer series, where we talk all things media and art and theater and film and etc. and how it interacts with our life. We will follow up with you at a later date.
All right.
Okay.
See ya.
Friends, that was our episode this week. As always, please email your questions and your suggestions to Reverend Mia McLean at mmcclain@myersparkbaptist.org. Until next time, take care. This is Sacred Justice.